In this lecture, we'll look at some of the basics of the Freudian psychoanalytic approach as it is applied to the interpretation of fairy tales. So let's begin today with looking at some of the very first techniques that Freud was using in his practice to try and connect with the latent content of our psyche, the hidden part that we are unaware of, which doesn't often make sense, but can reveal to us the processes that underlie much of our behavior, or that's what the theory proposes. One of the very first things that Freud noted was that sleepwalking or somnambulism was a state in which a person was asleep or mostly asleep and could say things or perform complex tasks. And Freud connected these with fulfilling libidinal wishes and desires. He hypothesized that the unconscious was producing strings of words, which he then took on and interpreted. He also noted that when a person was put into such a state through hypnosis, they were highly suggestible. And this led him to believe that the unconscious could be doing this suggesting on its own. After first setting up the proper relaxed atmosphere, then a series of free associations, simply speaking at will, later subjects would be prompted with images like ink blots of the Rorschach test. And after several dozen images, the analyst would then try to piece them together with the subject, what the latent content could be telling them. It is the type of guided storytelling and meaning making that is like tarot reading and other systems that help us create personal meaning from archetypal imagery. So what kind of word strings or associations would come from seeing such a neutral, abstract image? What do you see? And if I told you what I saw, then I would most likely influence what you see. So at this first one, I see two people with pointy caps sitting on a park bench. What about this one? What do you see there? If I were to suggest something, then it would most likely be a frozen turkey or an alien creature. How about this image? What does it conjure up for you? For me, it is a dragon folding its wings. And how about this one more? What do you see here? For me, it's a blotchy symbol for the Rebel Alliance from Star Wars. Now, for others who have taken this, it's got different interpretations. And from these answers, the psychoanalyst would provide connections to literature and myth, to their own ideas of the person's life. And the patient would also actively try to find meaningful connections between all the answers. And for our test subject, we can come up with comradeship, heroism, work combat, and honor, perhaps. Well, what do you know about Freudian theories? For the layman, he is often associated with a claim that everything can be interpreted through base drives and the representation of those drives, this civilizing force, which is often then reduced or misinterpreted as that every creative act is viewed as being containing some type of suppressed sexual or murderous content. This is, however, not a very fair reading of Freud, since his concept of the libido has much more to do with the embodiment of the pleasure we feel and how it motivates us psychologically. There is, however, also much to be gained by exploring the possible latent content of dreamlike narratives such as the fairy tale. The irrational underlying aspect of our psyche was the focus of his early work, and he was intent on developing ways to access it or simply recognizing the ways in which it expresses itself to us. One of these states he assumes brings us closer to our unconscious is our dreams. The next area of focus for Freud is set on what kinds of recurring symbols are common to the European or Viennese person, and what do these meanings or things represent. So there is memory, repressed memory in our dreams. That's the assumption. And most dream symbolism for Freud can be reduced to only a few items. And these include the human body, the nuclear family, birth, and death, and then a group of others included nakedness. His theory on dreams derives in part from previous thoughts on dreams and what they entail. Freud's claim that all dreams are irrational, we can already see in Socrates, who thought that civilized people often become wild beasts at night in their dreams. Freud insisted that dream symbolism was never about what appeared, but always stood in for something else, which he may have derived from the Talmud. The medieval church maintained that dreams were inspired by God, which was also symbolic. And Hobbes thought dreams were somatic stimuli, as did Voltaire and Kant, who thought that they were caused by disorders of the stomach. Goethe and other romantics exalted dreams as feats of imagination, material for inspiration and art. And Ralph Waldo Emerson thought dreams had poetic integrity, truth, and taught us something about our character, which is a predictor of future behavior. Freud thought much of this character was unknown to us. that it was part of the unconscious drives connecting the body and the mind together. So some of the dream imagery included interpretations by Freud of rather specific connections. Houses represent people with smooth walls, men with balconies, women. Royalty represents parents and authority figures, while small animals represent children and siblings. Water represents life, while journeys represent death. Clothing and uniforms represent nakedness. Pointy, long objects, faucets, and penetrating objects represent a phallus, as do telescopes, lizards, flying people, and inflatables. Jewelry represents loved ones, while dreaming about your teeth falling out represents a fear of castration. So in his interpretation of dreams and his work on the uncanny, he uses fairy tales by E.T. Hoffmann to demonstrate how latent content can manifest itself in surface expressions. Fairy tales are less narrative and more images of desire, sublimated desire that emanates from barely repressed drives and urges and are then composed into symbolic form. So latent is the desire that is hidden underneath the surface form, which becomes manifest in symbol, in text, in architecture, in language, in art, sculpture, etc. And this process of underlying desires becomes manifest symbolically as it's creating the return of the repressed. As Mary Ellis Dunning points out, that in Sleeping Beauty, there are many phallic images, such as the spindle that has been hidden away, pricking Beauty in her sleep, or the thorns, the towers, the spindle from which the dark fairy, the forgotten, the uninvited guest bestows upon her that death drive. In Snow White, the necrophilic desires this death drive, positions the prince how he wants his ideal mate to be completely submissive, defining his own activity and aliveness through the inaction and passivity of the princess.